On the podcast today, we're going to speak about chapter 69 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 69th episode of the 81 meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And as usual, Guiyang will read Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation, and I will read Derek Lin's translation.
There is a saying among soldiers, I dare not make the first move, but would rather play the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but would rather withdraw a foot. This is called marching without appearing to move, rolling up your sleeves without showing your arm, capturing the enemy without attacking, being armed without weapons. There is no greater catastrophe than underestimating the enemy. By underestimating the enemy, I risk losing what I value. Therefore, when the battle is joined, the underdog will win.
In using the military, there is a saying, I dare not to be the host, but prefer to be the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but prefer to withdraw a foot. This is called marching in formation without formation, raising arms without arms, grappling enemies without enemies, holding weapons without weapons. There is no greater disaster than to underestimate the enemy. Underestimating the enemy almost made me lose my treasures. So when evenly matched armies meet, the side that is compassionate shall win. So this chapter follows on from the last chapter where Lao Tzu discussed the virtue of non-contention. And the last few chapters have been about the strategy we should use in war, but also in our life in general. And I think Lao Tzu was really addressing this because of the problems that occurred in the Warring States period of China.
Yes, that's around the time when Lao Tzu was living, I think, at the contemporary time. And the China was split into many, many different countries. So the war was, I think, unceasing, I think. So the Lao Tzu wanted to share his insights through the Tao Te Ching, putting a few chapters about the soldiers and war and what you may lose when you go into the battle with the brute force and whatnot, right? So it's very reflective of what the Lao Tzu was going through that time when he was alive.
Yep. And his ideas of how to win a battle and how to win a war are in contrast to modern day, how we think about shock and awe when we go into a war zone and we go in with military might and force and so forth and so on. And obviously Lao Tzu is coming from a very compassionate place too. He doesn't seek to win over anyone, so to speak, and is more diplomatic about things, you could say, and wants to just resolve the issues rather than, stoke the fire. So, and, we spoke about the three treasures in chapter 67 in how to hold to compassion, conservation, and humility. And so Lao Tzu is kind of saying in this chapter that if we lose these, we will lose these if we follow this sort of path of force rather than the Taoist path of softness.
Yes. This chapter, again, reinforcing the Lao Tzu's key idea in his philosophy that softness is always going to overcome the power and very, the brute force and whatnot, right? So that's why you need to take a step back and be patient and be more observant to the situation. So that instead of being initiator of the battle, you rather playing a guest, like in this chapter saying, that you be more calm and observant and see the situation and read the moves so that you can strategize your move better. So in a sense that Lao Tzu is actually discouraging soldiers to become a fighter, initiating the fight rather than becoming the cautious defender. So that instead of you are initiating the harm and the violence on the others, when you need to defend, you need to defend what you have, right, obviously, but to become a peaceful defender. So I think Lao Tzu is trying to teach soldiers to be peaceful warrior in a sense.
And this is the sort of effortless action component of Wu Wei, the essential teaching of Taoism, right? So Lao Tzu is trying to inculcate or he's saying actually naturally we have this, but like because we go through a socialization process and we get conditioned, we lose connection with this naturalness that we have. But he's speaking about being immediate and appropriate to each and every situation. So it's a form of intelligent spontaneity. So you act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation rather than just plan out and have force and destroy the opposition, right? So he looks at this in a sense from like a martial arts perspective, where like even if we look at judo or aikido or hapkido, where like part of the tradition is to sort of move with the blow, not to be the aggressor, but learn how to move with the blow so you don't absorb the full force of it, right? So, and it's an ancient Taoist strategy, obviously, in war and in life, not to confront certain situations in your life, because often when we do meet situations with force, conflict is the result. And so Lao Tzu is looking at this whole situation of war and our life in general from like that martial arts perspective of intelligent spontaneity. Like, can we move intuitively through our life, like you were saying, like, you know, intuitively sense the situation, what the, you know, right move is on the battlefield, rather than just map it out. Look, this is what we've got to take out, what we've got to do at the cost of all of these lives. And so Lao Tzu is thinking in a bit more of a careful manner, rather than that we just have to defeat the opposition, right? And so the Warring States period of China was no different to this day and age in that respect, where there were different states warring over whose philosophy was the best, who had the best culture, and so forth and so on. And Confucianism kind of won out through the Warring States period of China. Taoism took a backseat. It had always been in the backseat, obviously, because it is only for those who have like a spiritual aptitude most of the time, who can see reality at a deeper level. But nevertheless, the idea of softness over force is relevant to any generation, to any culture, to any time or era all throughout history.
Yes, that's right. And even in the battlefield, when you can absorb enemies' force and the anger of the enemy, then actually it's kind of somehow becomes your power. Like you mentioned about the effortless action, like appropriate, effortless, immediate, spontaneous action. And that is actually, it's a huge gain as a peaceful warrior when the enemy comes out with just a brute force. But if you stay calm and if you're more observant, then the enemy's anger and that aggression becomes kind of your power, because you don't come from that place. So you're more observant and cautious, so that you find your next move according to enemy's move, right? So in a way that in the enemy's perspective, they give too much away, right? But if you stay calm and effortless manner, then kind of a natural path will play out for you, right? Just like in our real life too, that when we trying to solve some problems, for example, if you're trying to just solve the problem and your focal point is only to solve the problem, then you sometimes come up with the more conflict, that you meet with the more confusion. But if you are more observant and you're kind of trying to read the situation a little bit better and giving yourself more time to it, then sometimes it just things work out itself. And that is also applied to the same principle.
Yeah, Lao Tzu is definitely playing a long game here. He's not thinking about like immediate results, right? Like he's looking at the best course of action so that we don't incur harm on ourselves and a lot of harm on other people as well, if any harm on other people, which is kind of unavoidable on a battlefield. But he's looking at that long game, and like Lao Tzu's strategy is just basically, let's try and get through this with minimal costs, right? So that's not always a politician or a country's mentality, but that's his mentality, right? So, and again, I often think about Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in the Bhagavad Gita, right, where Krishna is imploring him to go into war, but not being attached to the fruits of his actions. So not being attached to the outcome, just fulfilling his dharma, fulfilling his duty. And so in that respect, Lao Tzu is, also advising the soldiers in that not to be attached to whatever the outcome may be, but to follow your true innate nature rather than have all of these grand plans about how you're going to conquer the enemy. And so it just comes back to sort of this naturalness of how things function, right? Like, so we often think things function through force. That's how we achieve things. But that comes at a psychological and physical cost most of the time, right? And like one of the simplest analogies for effortless action over force is just the key in the door analogy, right? You go to sharply turn the key, it just doesn't move. You can break the key, actually. Whereas if you just jiggle just enough, the door opens effortlessly, right? And so I know that that's just a simple analogy, but that applies to most of the things in our own life, right? Like we're trying to achieve certain things by force in our own life. Like we're trying to maybe get rich, for example. Someone's trying to get rich. And so what do? They take 3 jobs. They work night and day. They sleep 3 hours a day. What it can be the only result of that lifestyle?
Burnout.
Burnout, yeah, exactly. So that's the result of force. It's like this kind of toll it takes on others and also on ourselves when we try to achieve things that are almost unachievable, when we don't sort of look at the long game like Lao Tzu is talking about. Look at the long game, gracefully move through your life. And say if you have a plan of making $1 million or something like that, maybe it'll happen after 20 years. But it might not happen in 1 year, and you taking 3 jobs to try and get there and burning the candle at both ends is only going to cause a lot of harm. So you need to look at your life strategically, like from a long-term perspective. And that's how Lao Tzu is looking at all of these strategies within the Tao Te Ching.
Yes, that's a very important point. We like to achieve things and gain things just overnight, but we know it's just not going to happen, and we acting as if like we're going to die tomorrow, right? So we got to get it now, right? But that having a long game and bigger picture is a very important part. To have that perspective in life, it will help enormously in many different ways. And through this chapter, Lao Tzu also mentioning about not to underestimate the enemy, right? So underestimate what you're facing, right? Even what you're facing in life, the same thing. So somewhat expect the unexpected in a sense, that so that you are prepared. And again, to be able to do that, you need to have a bit of ease in your life too, isn't it? Like if you're trying to achieve things overnight, you get anxious and you get worried, you're concerned, and you have all these negative feelings. But you have a bit of ease in your life, then you give good mutual respect to the situation, or in this case, the enemy, then like literally in this chapter says, you won't lose what you value. Otherwise, you will lose what you value, right? So it's very important.
Yeah, that's right. And underestimating the enemy or underestimating the situations in your own life is important to understand, right? So as we were talking about force and this and that, like you don't want to overextend and lose balance in anything that you're doing in life. It's always about balance, right? And often we will underestimate the situations in our life, and then we will overextend ourselves. We will maybe put too much effort in or something like this, and then things just end up going awry in our own personal lives. And this is, most prevalent within war, right? So you need to understand the enemy in air quotes so that you know how to efficaciously move forward. Likewise within your own life. You need to know the situations on your own life's battlefield so that you know the best course of action to move forward, right? Like rather than just going full guns a-blazing ahead without any care for others and yourself, right? So like Lao Tzu saying, what do we value in this chapter? We value the 3 treasures, right? Like we want to keep those intact within ourselves. We want to keep that compassion, conservation, and humility intact. So if we're not conserving our energy, we're overextending, we're losing balance. And then nothing possibly good could come from that, right? So you want to efficaciously move forward. So you need to understand the battlefield. You need to understand your enemy in air quotes, right? Lao Tzu's using a war analogy here. So it's not good to be aggressive in conflict, right? You need to understand and keep that compassionate approach. You know, we're often going into anything in our lives with this aggressive attitude. You know, in the modern day, people can just hear one thing and their hate is instantly turned on, and they become aggressive. They lose their center. Naturally, they're probably compassionate, right? But they've been trained over the course of their life to get triggered by certain words, or if someone thinks completely different than them, and then they act in this aggressive manner, right? So you lose your balance. And that, again, is another point of overextending yourself. That aggression means you've overextended. In a fight, right, when someone overextends themselves, it's often that they have a lot of emotions within themselves. They're fighting emotionally rather than strategically, right? And so Lao Tzu is telling us to move through our life not in an emotional way, but more in a strategic way. And so that's where you need to understand that the Tao, in some senses, is not emotional to our plight in life. It loves and nourishes all, but does not lord it over them. It doesn't favor anyone over the other. It's impartial to us, right? It moves through us, but the results of our life, it is completely impartial to what is going on in our lives. So, like, you want to get out of these ideas of I'm blessed and this and that. This is not like a Taoist approach, right? It's about understanding the own course of your own life and how to move through it without being overly emotional and just walking the path of the Tao without any care for what people think about you or actually even where you are heading.
Yes. Finding that balance, what you mentioned, is actually the most important and the essence of Taoism, I think. And as you mentioned, that without the judging over what's right move or wrong move, or what's correct and incorrect, and moving away from that kind of a very conceptual idea, whether that's wrong or whether that's right, if that's right and appropriate in a situation that will create the balance, then that is the ultimately correct move that you make, right? So, like in Zhuangzian philosophies, how he makes fun of people who are trying to make distinction between right and wrong, right? And what is right becomes wrong, wrong becomes right, and then in the end, what is it then, you know? But yeah, finding the right balance in that each different situation is most important thing, and to be able to do it is the most difficult part, right? But I think to be able to do that is to have that ease in your life and not to achieve something quickly. Yeah, so be more calm and observant in your life. We will have all make mistake every now and then, but from that mistakes we also learn, like you said, not swayed by your emotional state in different situations, but in that situation, if you can kind of distance yourself from that emotion, then maybe a little bit easier to find that right balance.
That's right. And as you mentioned with Zhuangzi, like the idea of Xiao Yao Yu, like this sort of rambling without a destination, or roaming without a destination, or aimless roaming, let's say, walking through your life but not having a clearly defined place of where you're going, right? And so when you are moving through life like that, you are already not really emotional to whatever outcome is going to come, right? Because you're an open book and you're just moving through life. And Zhuangzi was big on keeping your center and keeping balance, but walking as one with the Tao. And wherever the Tao takes you, it takes you. It's only when we follow the path of force and we have too many plans and we're contrived that we sort of veer off the path of the Tao. We we can never be separate from the Tao, but we lose our resonance, our harmonic resonance with the Tao in moving with it. And so Chuang-Tzu would say, and Lao Tzu would agree in this chapter, we need to kind of come back into that Xiao Yao Yu, that aimless roaming where we don't have a clearly defined destination, but we're enjoying the process of our life without being overly emotional about it.
Yes, we need to down-regulate our sense of ego, and we remove that, and we just follow whatever is presenting in front of you, but not having like very solid goal or aim that you're gonna get to, but to enjoy the process of wherever it's going. But you need to enjoy the process. That's, I think, most important thing. But then wherever you end up in a certain situation or destination or whatever, then you can actually appreciate it, right? Because you never planned to get that particular situation, but it kind of you follow through whatever it was presenting to you, and you effortlessly move through it, so that you can finally appreciate what you end up with.
That's right.
Yeah.
And us as individuals, identities, egos, could never have planned where we would end up.
It'd only be an obstacle.
That's right. It's only the Tao that knows exactly where we're going. So guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.